Beneath the crushing black waters of the world's oceans, battles have taken place that no satellite has ever captured, and no civilian has ever heard. The Cold War wasn't just fought with missiles pointed at cities or jets screaming across skies. It was fought in silence, in the deep, where American and Russian submarines stalked each other like shadows in the abyss. A single wrong move could have unleashed a chain reaction that changed the course of history forever. What if the most dangerous confrontations of the Cold War were the ones we never saw? What if entire fleets of nuclear-armed submarines drifted just miles apart, listening, waiting, daring the other to make a mistake? And what if, even today, those silent duels are still happening in the world's oceans? In this story, you'll uncover the hidden world of America's stealthy hunters and Russia's silent predators. You'll see how close the world came to a war no one could win. Stay with me until the end, because once you learn what really lurked beneath the waves, you'll never look at the ocean the same way again. This video is for educational purposes only, but the story you're about to hear will feel like a thriller unfolding before your eyes. The ocean's hidden battlefield, the Cold War, is remembered for its walls, its spies, its nuclear brinkmanship, and its superpower rivalries. But far away from crowded cities and political stages, a secret theater of war was unfolding. Thousands of feet below the surface, submarines belonging to the United States Navy and the Soviet Union played the deadliest game of hide-and-seek in human history. For the average person, the ocean is a vast blue horizon, calm, endless, unbroken. But for the crews aboard nuclear submarines, that same horizon was a trapdoor leading to a battlefield no one could see. Once the hatch closed and the vessel slipped beneath the waves, silence became their armor and shadows became their weapons. Each man aboard knew that one wrong sound, one careless movement, could give away their position to an enemy listening just beyond the dark. The American Navy had perfected the art of stealth, with submarines that moved like whispers and sonar so advanced it could track a rival without ever being heard. But the Soviets were determined to prove they could match, even surpass, that silent power. Their boats were louder, but they were relentless, driven by a determination to guard their homeland at any cost. Night after night, these vessels glided past each other in the pitch-black depths, often closer than the length of a football field. Crews strained their ears, hearts pounding, as they tried to determine if the sound echoing through their sonar headsets was just a whale or a hostile submarine. The difference could mean survival or annihilation. And as the world above slept peacefully, leaders in Washington and Moscow relied on these hidden warriors to prevent the unthinkable, a nuclear strike launched from beneath the sea. Yet the most chilling part was not that they were preparing for war. It was that, sometimes, they nearly started one by accident. What happened when a Soviet submarine pushed too close to American waters? What happened when an American hunter sub cornered its prey deep under the Arctic ice? Those stories were buried for decades. But now we bring them to the surface. The silent duel in the Arctic Ocean was more than ice and frozen winds. For the United States and the Soviet Union, it was the chessboard of the Cold War. Beneath the frozen surface lay the shortest path for nuclear missiles to travel between Washington and Moscow. Whoever controlled these waters controlled the balance of terror. And it was here that submarines from both nations began their most dangerous duels. Picture the scene: miles of shifting ice above, a black abyss below, and somewhere in that silence, an American hunter-killer submarine trailing the faint sound of a Soviet ballistic missile submarine. Inside the American vessel, red lights glowed faintly in the control room. The crew spoke in whispers, their eyes locked on sonar screens that pulsed with ghostly echoes. They were not simply tracking a submarine. They were shadowing the potential end of the world. For the Soviet crews, life was just as tense. Their orders were simple: disappear beneath the ice, stay hidden, and wait. Their submarines carried nuclear warheads capable of reducing entire cities to dust. But hiding was never easy. The ice above distorted sonar signals. Engines had to run at the lowest hum. Even the clink of a wrench could travel through the water like a gunshot. One wrong sound, and the Americans would know exactly where they were. One wrong move, and the Soviets could find themselves surrounded. There are stories still whispered among naval veterans of American subs gliding so close to their Soviet counterparts that the crew could hear bolts rattling on the enemy's hull. Imagine the pressure. Two nuclear powers, armed to the teeth, separated only by a few feet of steel. No shots fired, yet the tension was explosive. But this was more than a game of cat and mouse. Each encounter tested not just machines, but the nerves of men. A sonar operator might mistake the groan of shifting ice for an approaching submarine. A commander, certain that he was being hunted, might decide to maneuver aggressively, risking a collision in the pitch-black deep. And a collision between nuclear-armed submarines could ignite a crisis that spiraled far beyond the ocean floor. One such incident almost changed history forever. In the late 1960s, a Soviet Yankee-class submarine strayed dangerously close to American waters. The U.S. Navy dispatched one of its most advanced hunter-killer submarines to shadow it. For days they danced a deadly duet beneath the Arctic, the American sub so close that it could have destroyed the Soviet vessel before the Soviets even knew what happened. Yet the order never came. Instead, both crews continued their patrols, never revealing how close they had come to disaster. It was not the only time. Throughout the Cold War, collisions between submarines occurred more often than the world will ever know. Sometimes the impact was minor, just a shudder that sent men tumbling through darkened corridors. Other times, the damage forced emergency surfacing, where rival submarines found themselves staring at each other through the misty Arctic air, each captain wondering if the other would fire. And through it all, silence was the only shield. Silence was the only weapon to the outside world. The Cold War was defined by nuclear missiles on land and jets streaking across the skies. But here, beneath the frozen ceiling of the Arctic, the true balance of power was being decided. Whoever could stay hidden longest, whoever could listen most carefully, would control the fate of nations. The chilling truth. Some of these duels ended with submarines that never returned. Lost in the silence. Swallowed by the depths. Officially, governments called them accidents, but the men who served knew better. They knew those accidents were part of a war fought in whispers. As the Arctic battles raged on, another battlefield was quietly opening thousands of miles away, in the vastness of the Pacific. And there, the game of shadows would reach an entirely new level. The shadows of the Pacific Ocean, is not just water, it is a world unto itself. It stretches farther than the eye can grasp, deeper than most mountains are tall, and darker than any night on land. For America and the Soviet Union, the Pacific was both a shield and a trap. Beneath its waves, submarines carried the power to alter human history in an instant. Unlike the Arctic, where shifting ice created a natural barrier, the Pacific was vast and open, a hunting ground with no limits. It was here that America's submarine fleet felt most at home. From bases in Pearl Harbor, Guam, and San Diego, American hunter-killer submarines slipped silently into the blue abyss, their mission clear: find and shadow the Soviet missile submarines that tried to slip undetected into striking range of the U.S. West Coast. The Pacific was where silence became a duel of technology. America had invested heavily in nuclear submarines built for stealth, their hulls coated in sound-absorbing tiles, their propellers sculpted to slice through water without a trace. Their sonar arrays were so sensitive that they could pick up the faint rumble of a Soviet submarine hundreds of miles away. In contrast, the Soviet submarines were powerful, but louder. Their propellers often betrayed them, sending vibrations echoing through the depths. To American sonar operators, those echoes were like fingerprints, each class of submarine leaving its own distinct acoustic signature. And yet, the Soviets were not blind. They knew they were being hunted, and they fought back with bold maneuvers. Soviet captains developed tactics to confuse trackers, suddenly cutting power to drift silently, or diving deeper than their pursuers dared follow. It became a dangerous game of patience. Who would blink first? Who would make the fatal mistake? One legendary encounter took place in the mid-1970s. An American Los Angeles-class submarine had locked onto the sound of a Soviet Delta-class ballistic missile sub. For hours, the American boat shadowed its quarry, staying just outside detection range. But then, without warning, the Soviet captain pulled off a desperate move. He dove at a steep angle into a deep trench, shutting down nearly every system aboard. The American crew watched their sonar screen go blank. The Soviet sub had vanished into the abyss. For long minutes, nothing. No sound, no trace. Then faintly the noise of engines starting again, now behind the American sub. The hunter had become the hunted. That single maneuver shook the U.S. Navy's confidence. It revealed that the Soviets, though technologically behind, could still outwit the most advanced machines in the world if commanded by daring men. But these duels were not just about tactical pride. They were about survival. Each submarine carried nuclear weapons powerful enough to obliterate cities. If a hunter submarine fired first, there might be no time for retaliation. If it hesitated, the world above might pay the price. Every captain knew the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. A single torpedo launched in fear could trigger a nuclear exchange between two superpowers. Pacific also held another danger: collisions. With thousands of square miles of open ocean, one might think accidents would be impossible. Yet more than once, submarines from both nations slammed into each other in the darkness. One such collision in 1981 left an American submarine limping back to port, its hull torn open, while the Soviet vessel barely escaped disaster. Official reports downplayed the incidents, calling them training mishaps or routine damage, but the men who lived through them knew how close the world had come to catastrophe. And all the while, satellites, aircraft, and surface ships above the ocean had no idea what was happening below. Nations prepared for war in the skies, while the true brinkmanship was unfolding in the silent dark. The Pacific battles revealed something chilling. Technology alone could not guarantee survival. Human instinct, bravery, and sometimes sheer luck determined who lived to fight another day. But as the 1980s dawned, a new dimension entered this silent war. It was not just about who could hide deepest or move quietest. It became about who could control the very signals that submarines relied upon. The Cold War beneath the waves was about to merge with the invisible world of electronic warfare. And in that world, even silence could be deceiving. The War of Signals and Shadows. By the 1980s, the silent battles between American and Soviet submarines had evolved beyond steel hulls and torpedoes. The oceans were still the arena, but the weapons were no longer just physical. The war was shifting into a dimension that could not be seen, touched, or even fully understood by most people: the War of Signals. The ocean is not truly silent. It is alive with sound waves singing across hundreds of miles, storms rumbling through the depths, even the quiet crackle of shrimp on coral reefs. Submarines lived in that world of sound, navigating through a sea of whispers. Sonar was their vision. Sonar was their lifeline. And that made it the perfect target for deception. America pioneered advanced sonar systems, some mounted on submarines, others placed on the seabed itself. These networks formed invisible tripwires across the Atlantic and Pacific, capable of detecting Soviet submarines as they attempted to slip into striking range. To counter this, the Soviets developed their own strategies, sending out decoys, small machines designed to mimic the sound of a submarine's propeller. For a moment, the hunter might chase the wrong target, wasting precious hours. In the deep, Those hours meant survival, but deception went even deeper. Soviet submarines learned to exploit underwater geography. They hid in canyons and beneath thermal layers natural shifts in ocean temperature that bent and scattered sonar signals. To American operators, it was as if the enemy simply vanished. Silence became camouflage. The United States answered with new tricks of its own. Electronic warfare pods allowed submarines to create false signals, tricking Soviet sonar into hearing submarines where none existed. Entire ghost fleets could appear on a screen, leaving Soviet captains paralyzed with uncertainty. Was the threat real? Or was it a phantom? In the deep, hesitation could be fatal. The silent duel of deception reached its peak during a mission known only to a handful of men in history. American submarines slipped dangerously close to Soviet waters, planting listening devices on the ocean floor. These devices tapped into undersea communication cables, pulling back the curtain on Soviet naval movements. For years, America listened in silence, tracking the heartbeat of its rival without firing a single shot. But secrecy was fragile. When the Soviets discovered the intrusion, it was as if the ocean itself had betrayed its secrets. The balance of the silent war shifted again, and with it came new paranoia. If America could hear the Soviet fleet's every move, what could the Soviets be doing in return? Were American submarines being tracked by invisible signals, their every dive mapped, their every silence recorded? Electronic warfare was terrifying not because it destroyed ships, but because it destroyed certainty. A torpedo could be seen. A collision could be felt. But a false sonar echo, a scrambled signal, a vanishing trace that gnawed at the mind of every captain and every crewman. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you protect yourself from ghosts? Some veterans of that era described nights where men sat for hours in silence, convinced that a Soviet submarine was stalking them, only to discover that the sound was an illusion. Others recall moments when the sonar screens showed nothing at all, yet the crew swore they felt the thrum of another submarine passing close by. It was as if the ocean itself had become a conspirator, hiding truths, inventing lies, and testing the limits of human nerves. This invisible war blurred the line between technology and psychology. Submarine crews were not only battling their enemy, they were battling doubt, fear, and the crushing weight of the unknown. In that environment, bravery meant not pulling the trigger at the first sign of danger. It meant holding steady, waiting, listening. Even when the silence itself was screaming at you to act. But electronic deception was only the beginning. The rise of satellites, surveillance aircraft, and global tracking networks brought a new layer to the submarine conflict. The oceans were vast, but they were no longer safe. Space had entered the game, and with it came the next escalation in the silent war. Because if the oceans could hide secrets, the heavens could reveal them. The final frontier of silence. The Cold War may have ended on paper in 1991, but the ocean never forgot. The silent battles between America and Russia's submarines left behind scars on the seafloor, wrecks swallowed by darkness, and memories carried only by the men who survived them. Yet as one chapter of history closed, another was already opening, one where the silent war would no longer be confined to the deep. Technology had advanced. Satellites began to pierce the secrecy of the oceans. They could spot the subtle disturbances a submarine left as it moved through water. High-altitude aircraft scanned for anomalies in the seas below. Even space-based infrared sensors tracked the faint heat signatures of submarines near the surface. What had once been a battlefield ruled by silence was becoming a world watched from above. For the United States, this meant its most prized hunter-killer submarines were no longer invisible. For Russia, it meant that its nuclear deterrent, the silent missile boats hidden under polar ice, could one day be exposed in real time. The thought was terrifying. In a world where submarines could be tracked from space, The balance of power would shift overnight. And so, the War of Silence evolved. Submarines were redesigned with even quieter engines, advanced hull shapes, and coatings that absorbed sonar like a cloak. Crews drilled in the art of vanishing, learning how to use undersea mountains, trenches, and shifting thermal layers to break the gaze of satellites. Russia invested in enormous new missile submarines, floating fortresses of steel designed to vanish under the Arctic ice for months. America pushed forward with even more silent hunters, like the Seawolf and Virginia-class subs boats that turned the ocean into their hunting ground with almost supernatural stealth. But the oceans were no longer the only frontier. Space itself became the silent observer. Both nations poured resources into satellites that could track naval movements, map undersea terrain, and even listen to faint electronic signals bleeding through the waves. The ocean, once a sanctuary of secrecy, was now part of a global web of surveillance. And yet, even with satellites, drones, and digital networks, the essence of submarine warfare never changed. It remained a battle of nerves, patience, and silence. What does the future hold? Some analysts believe that the next silent war will not be fought with torpedoes or sonar, but with artificial intelligence. Machines will listen, learn, and predict enemy movements faster than any human ear could. Cyber warfare could blind entire fleets, sending false commands, scrambling navigation, or even turning a submarine into a ghost ship adrift in the dark. Others warn of an even more chilling possibility: unmanned submarines prowling the depths without crews, programmed to strike if threatened. A machine cannot hesitate. A machine cannot doubt. But a machine also cannot feel the weight of responsibility that kept so many Cold War captains from pulling the trigger. The ocean is vast. It is mysterious. It hides secrets that will never be told. And yet, somewhere beneath the waves, the legacy of America and Russia's silent battles still lingers. Every time a submarine slips beneath the surface today, whether American, Russian, Chinese, or any other, it carries with it the lessons of those unseen duels. Silence is still a weapon. Shadows are still a shield. And the ocean is still a battlefield where the fate of nations can turn in an instant. The world never knew how close we came, not once but many times, to catastrophe in the deep. The Cold War may have ended without fire, but it was not without battles. They were just battles fought in silence. And so, as you look out at the calm horizon of the sea, remember this: beneath that surface, there may still be submarines circling each other, waiting, watching, daring the other to make a mistake. The war beneath the waves has never truly ended. It has only gone deeper, quieter, more dangerous. This video is for educational purposes only, but the story you have heard is real in its lessons and chilling in its warnings. The ocean's greatest secrets are not the creatures that swim in its depths. They are the men and machines that once held the power to end the world and chose, again and again, to remain silent.